Today we're going to be looking at some advanced Dungeons and Dragons, and what specifically we want to talk about today, and this has just come by a handful of requests and I thought I'll speed track it. Sure, let's get on with it. So what we're going to look at is we're going to wander through the monster manual and just have a look at what it is that builds a monster and what we can do with all of these animals that we have that's listed in here. I'm not planning on reading through the whole book page by page, but if you're able to, reading the preface and the foreword is really something that's worth just having a glance through, because it very much explains the form of thinking that went into this book. With the beginnings of Advanced Dungeons and Dragons, that's the release of this book. It marks a moving on from the previous D&D and the various supplements that came with that, including like Blackmore and Greyhawk, etc., and how it blends across. So if you were playing the older systems, this book was still valid and it had every piece of information that was required for you to be able to use this. And if you were on the journey through to AD&D, then you were able to get a glimpse as to what the differences were and what was happening with the game and moving forward. And part of that is obviously how the monsters are handled, and this is where this comes in first. So having the monster guide out first is a really good idea, and it allows everyone to see how some of the rules were changing. Now, what you will often hear from many of us who play the game is about the rule of three, or the Trinity. And because the monster manual came first and had opening rules and new rules, they would hold true until, of course, some of them got a little bit adjusted, as we should say, in the player's handbook, and then further adjusted again in the DM's guide. So a rule that you may find in monster manual gets tweaked along the way after obviously a couple of years of play, because there's a handful of years difference between the first and the third book. But then some rules were kept. In here we have a few explanations that we don't get in the other books, because Gygax was loath to repeat himself. So what we'll do is we'll just get on with looking at the blocks and working out where everything all fits from there. So I'm just going to open up here and have a look at everyone's favourite cannon fodder. And be it known that the Orcs were actually quite tough, but of course being one hit dice and being at lower levels, and generally we got used to the idea of pushing them around. But this is what the stat block looks like. And what is also quite interesting in this whole book is that often they will have a picture of the creature, but in many cases it's a picture of the creature and how it's disposing of eating, consuming, defeating, killing, or in some other way harassing players or player characters, adventurers. So you get to see what they do, which is a good way of introducing that monster. This is what it does, and this is how it manages to eat people. So the first elephant in the room comes from the term monster, because the monster represents absolutely every encounter that a player character will enjoy, and some of them are harmful and some of them are helpful. But the term monster has two folds, as it says. One is the actual basic, every encounter is a monster until the players know what it is, and the other one is that a monster is a vile and foul creature that actually wants to just kill everybody. So something could be a monster and something could be a monster. Yep, you just have to work out based on what is being read as to what it thinks. Now in terms of elves, dwarves, and so on, and characters and types, they have obviously their own matrices as well that are in play. You don't have to just deal with the monster matrix on those. If they're a magic user or a fighter, then you'll use those. Alright, so that's basically the initial meeting of minds when it comes to what is a monster. Alright, so the monster stat block is made up of some various lines of data. As you can imagine, being this an encyclopedia of creatures and animals and fantastical creatures, then what we have is the lines that define that particular creature, and some of them are common among others and share traits, and some are specific to that entry or that particular monster. Frequency, I'll just go through some of these pieces because there's a little bit of interest in the way that some of these blocks are put together. But with frequency, we can see that it runs pretty much the rules of Pareto, where we've got a 65% chance for common and so on. Now this is before any of the encounter tables were created from the DMG, and even at the end in the DM guide, all of those encounter tables are there in case you haven't made your own. And as an example, based on this, on what your own encounter table would look like, I've put something sort of together. So before we had scenarios where we had massive pages of encounter tables and everything else, what we knew was that if it was common, then there was roughly a 65% chance. And as luck would have it, that sort of falls in the 9 to 12 mark on a 3d6 being rolled. And then of course, as we know from seeing the bell curve for the 3d6, we know that it peters out from there. So uncommon on either side, followed by rare, and then very rares on the 3 and 18s. With the majority of rolls being between 9 and 12, that would be common. So once you've created that, and that is so clearly lining up with what Gygax put forward as his idea of frequency, guaranteed this is what he was thinking in terms of where it actually sits. And then you create your list of common, uncommon, rare and very rare creatures, and if you have your own chance encounter, you then have your random roll as to what type of monster and work it from there. So frequency is important because it sort of covers a little bit more about not only the levels of commonness, but also what you might find is in some areas, certain creatures or certain animals are more common than others. Whilst something may be listed as uncommon in the book, that might be a generic uncommon, but you may be actually in an area where they are common. And the DM will adjust and change however they want, of course, and that's where we come into the number of appearing. So the number of appearing isn't just the number that you may encounter, but also the maximum number that are in that region. So you might have a patrol of orcs, which could be anywhere from 7 to 12, and then you may roll the full value of what that orc total is, and that might be the area that the orcs have. So they may have a nice 1-200 strong unit nearby, and what you've encountered is a patrol from that unit, and so on. So the area that you're in will have the frequency and the number of appearing, but then what you actually encounter may not be, you may not intentionally walk into 200 orcs, you may not, but you might hit a patrol, which is a smaller part of a larger group. That sort of comes into play in a little bit, because when players meet up with wandering monsters, they drain resources and they drain valuable hit points, and a DM needs to really make sure that they're working that out so that they're not forcing too much hassle too early, and never let a wandering monster get in the way of a successful adventure. So don't check, don't check, change the result, whatever you need to do, because you don't want them to blow all their decent spells out of a chance encounter On the flip side, that may be the whole thing, and that might be what you're after. But it's just a word to the wise, just to take that into consideration. So the next step is armor class, and armor class was obviously becoming more of a valuable commodity in the way that the game was being put together, because we have more of an actual definition of what armor class is and what it encompasses, especially with regard to monsters, but it does make mention of regular humans and humanoid creatures and the armors that they wear, meaning that it's not described that way anywhere else, at least not yet. So with that, you have your armor class, which already takes into consideration a number of factors, and that will result in a number which obviously reflects to the creature in general. A red dragon has an armor class of -1, but that's obviously in terms of to damaging it, because the quote-unquote to hit roll is not exactly a striking to hit and strike. It's what's your opportunity for causing damage to the target. Now, in terms of movement, if you remember, we're also moving across, no pun intended, moving across from a tabletop miniatures game into a theatre of the mind style role-playing game. So there are still aspects of old scale miniatures being moved across into the theatre of the mind, and part of that is obviously the move, which includes inches as to where they can actually go and what those inches represent in terms of an overall distance that they can travel at a constant level. So if something has a 12-inch move, it's a constant 12-inch move. They might have bursts of speed that go faster, but for the most part, that's the speed that they move. We have hit dice, which is the number of D8 being rolled. And as we know, player characters and classes have their own hit dice and what their values are, but for the most part, monsters run at 1d8. There are some monsters, and it's important to note, have hit points rather than hit die. So when you're dealing with those, and we're looking at you, Beholder, where you have a number of hit die, you divide that number of hit points by 4.5, and that will tell you how many hit dice it actually represents. Sometimes the hit dice are important for things like combat, because the more hit dice you have, the better you save, and also because you're treated as that level in fighter for the most part. And also in terms of combat, you need to know the hit dice so that what matrix they're on. So if a character or a creature has hit points, such as a devil, a unique devil, or a beholder, you divide their values by 4.5, which comes up with a number, and that is the hit dice that they're equivalent to. So the percentage chance of being in the lair specifically comes into play when you meet up with a creature near its lair or in its lair. If you're near an empty cave, let's say the party are having to find some comfort in some respite in what appears to be just an abandoned cave, and they go in, but it turns out that cave is the beginning of a hill giant's lair, then the hill giant has a 25% chance of being in there at the time that the players come in from the elements. Or if the roll isn't there, the hill giant will come back. But that being the hill giant's lair, will have its treasure and will have its food and living stuffs inside the cave or the cave complex. It might be 3 or 4 rooms, it might be like rooms, quote unquote, it might be just carved out and the hill giant's just been squatting, and then the players have rocked up, gone into the cave, found the system, sought some bizarre treasure, and then the hill giant comes back from whatever it was doing, probably hunting. Or the hill giant may actually be in the lair, the 25% came up and they are in the lair. That's where you have that percentage roll, and if you're with an encounter and you encounter a reasonable group, you might go, okay, well, they're actually near the lair 25% of the time. They might be a family or a group or a tribe of ogres, and they scout out within a half mile, and when they meet an ogre or a couple of ogres or 3 ogres, you can roll the percentage chance and determine whether or not they are actually near their lair, or if they are more of an advanced scouting group. Sometimes a random encounter is good, just to churn the silt at the bottom of a stagnant pool of water, and then that way the players have something to do in the short term while you're madly trying to figure out how to get everything back on track. They suddenly can find the local lair, or where the ogres are storing all their treasure or whatever, because you meet a couple and you know that they've got a lair nearby. The more sensible players will start to be thinking, let's clear out the infestation. Alright, so treasure type we've gone through a little bit before, but what is worth noting in this meaty text is that it's for a complete number, and then it's ratioed back from there. So if the largest lair of a group of brigands has thousands and thousands of coins worth of value and so on, when you meet a small patrol, they're not going to be carrying all of that treasure with them. They'll have whatever's their individual, but that's about all that they'll have. Then you'll have to go back to their lair, or go back to their base of operations, and collect the treasure from that point. And that's where you'll find an individual value, as well as an in the lair value for some monsters. Some monsters don't care about treasure and they don't really collect it. It's just where all the bodies have fallen, and it's almost like a lure for the next lot of players to see the armor and the shields and the coins and the bags of whatever's piled in the middle of the room, for them to greedily lurch into, only for the lurker above to land on them, or for the trapper to stop being the floor and swallow them whole. There's a lot of things. This is a game where the ceilings and the floors will eat you if you give them half a chance. Number of attacks is obviously the basic number of attacks that the creature has, which can be modified as combat goes forward. Some spells, or if they lose limbs and so on, and everything else. But it's generally just their straight out physical attacks, and unless specified, will all be directed towards the 1. So if you've got a creature that's got a claw bite routine, they will attack one of the party members, unless it says specifically that they're able to spread those attacks, which generally happens only when the monster is got very particular special abilities, 2 heads, multiple limbs, or like a hydra, snapping heads. So that's when they can attack multiple, but for the most part, when they have their general standard attack routine, the number of attacks are facing off against a single opponent. Damage per attack is literally the damage for each of the attack dice. So on a claw bite, it is literally claw and bite, and then you've got the 2 claws followed by the bite, or a single bite, or multiple bites, or multiple claws, or just if the creature is specifically cool, it may have multiple attacks just on its own, more opportunities. It's just an aggressive creature that sacrifices defense, as shown in the armor class, for more attacks in order to be able to just get out there and get into it, and so on. So the damage per the attack can also be based on a weapon if they carry weapons, or different types of variants. So the ogre gets an increase in damage if they use a standard weapon for their strength. Now the special attacks and special defenses as sounds, and if they have any, are listed in the description of the rules. Sometimes special attacks are all sorts of goodies, and intelligent creatures will use their abilities intelligently. And some things are once per day, some things are at will, some things are, well, once. So when they use them well, and they, even if they've got a lower intelligence, which we'll get to, they might have a high cunning. And same thing with defenses. That's specifically the most common form of defenses are things like only to be able to strike by magical weapons, or magical weapons of a certain value, plus 2, 3s, and 4s. Or they might have something else in their minds for the defenses. They might exude a gas that causes everybody to be at minuses for their attack or whatever. One of the most important pieces to get your head around is, of course, about magic resistance. So magic resistance is a very special type of resistance. It is expanded upon in the Monster Manual 2, and just gives a better example basically, but it explains it here, but it's just that it's a better example there. Essentially, the magic resistance is your percentage chance of ignoring or resisting spells that are directly targeted at the character. So a character that has a 20% magic resistance can always make a defense, even if it says there's no saving throw, of that 20%. Now the biggest caveat in that is that it's assuming that the magic resistance is versus an 11th level magic user, or an 11th level spellcaster. And for every pip, every level below that, the percentage increases, and for every level above it, it decreases. So that 20% magic resistance, when cast as a magic missile spell cast at something that has a 20% magic resistance, if the magic user is for an 11th level, then it's a 20% resistance. If 12th level, it goes to 15, and so on, to the point where it becomes 0 once the levels are high enough. On the flip side, a 5th level would increase the resistance from 20 going up to 100% resistance, depending on the level of the spellcaster. That's pretty much the largest, that's the first point of interest when it comes to the head messes that is magic resistance. But what it also implies here is that the magic resistance is almost a bubble of anti-magic, or a bubble of resistance. Because when the character comes into contact with a spell, it also has that same percentage chance of breaking that spell, sort of. They make mention of Hold Portal, where the creature has an effect on certain existing spells, such as Hold Portal. So there's a lot of caveat for the magic for the DM to figure out what that specifically means. So whether the bubble that exists around someone that has magic resistance, and there are the occasional item or ability that can be conferred to players, so it's handy for a DM to figure it out. If it's an illusion and they walk past it, if it's runes of warding, do they negate it? If it's an alarm or a particular spell that creates an effect in an area, Magic Mouth, does it stop it? Some of those questions are answers are yes, and some of them are no. An earthquake, whilst it is yes magic and it creates an earthquake, the collapsing roof, the opening of the ground and swallowing up characters is nothing to do with magic. It's to do with the effect of, well, the earthquake. So there's a small bubble of protection, thinking of burning hands and fireball, so that the equipment being carried doesn't ignite, because essentially they're on the person, on the person who has the magic resistance. But if you set fire to a room with a magical fire, then that will come into play. that's just a thing to think about. If you douse them in oil and then cast flaming hands on something or burning hands on something, and then set, like there are scenarios where you can bypass the magic resistance, but it just takes a little bit of thinking, and that's where the players have to work it out, as well as what the DM is going to allow and not allow. But in effect, the percentage chance of resisting a spell, even if there's a no saving throw, and that chance will adjust depending on the level of the caster. The lower the level of the caster, the more resistance the person will have. So then we come to intelligence of the creature, which comes into play with especially certain effects or spell results, and intelligent creatures will respond in a certain way and unintelligent creatures will respond in other ways. And animal intelligences are going to react and so on. So cunning and the abilities come into play. So a creature that may be a low intelligent or a very semi-intelligent creature but has a strong hunting instinct may actually know how to use their abilities to do what they do. They might have 2 or 3 things. The cat knows to run up the tree, basically, to escape most things. The old parable, the intelligent fox that has 20 ways of escaping hounds and the cat has 1. So that's just the way it works. Then you've got the creatures like orcs, which are average to low, which means that while a normal human is considered between 9 and 12, although we've got average listed here as that, but the average is between 9 and 12. Once you've got 3 dice rolled, it's 10.5. So again, what we're looking at is how we're seeing what averages and average stats for people look like. And when player characters are running around with 13s and 14s, exactly what that means for the rest of them. And we've sort of had a conversation roughly on that, talked about that, but it's always worth remembering that when you've got a high stat, even 13 plus, you are standing well and truly above and beyond everyone else. So an average with brackets low just means it comes down a little bit from the average. So instead of maybe the 9 to 12, it's a 7 to 10 or something like along those lines. In the DM's guide, they make a reference to a chart based on the intelligence as to what the equivalent wisdom is, because on occasion you need to know what the wisdoms are and so on. So that's in the DMG, and that's something that we haven't really looked at because it only really equates to very specific circumstances when they need to know the wisdom of a character or of a creature. It does appear that low intelligence is the start of anything that has minimal levels of talking or understanding in terms of being able to communicate into back and forth. Semi-intelligent creatures can understand instructions and can take details, and low intelligence, the animal intelligence can be trained. Obviously, we know that, but that takes time. But my guess is that for the most part, character that have animals as followers, as friends, as from a ranger point of view, or from the horse that's used by the paladin, they're generally of a better standard and familiars are of a better standard than the regular types. And once they get to semi-intelligent, they're able to understand and make use of more complex instructions. And then at low intelligence, they're able to have almost a two-way, have some sort of dialogue in whatever animal speak that they have or forms that they can do. So, and then that seems to be where the low level, so 5, seems to be where the ability to have two-way discussions is the start of everything else. So up to that point, if a druid is using speak with animals, they're only going to get what 1 intelligence gets you. I'm hungry, I'm not hungry, it's cold, folk, and so on. But or brief descriptions based on what 1 intelligence gathers. Alignment is alignment. Yep, we all know what alignment is, and we can specifically get into conversations about how alignments work another day. But size is really the next most important thing to be discussing, because that's where obviously damage for weapons come in, because weapon damage is based on the size of the creature, whether it's a small to medium or a large based creature. So generally 7-ish feet is considered medium, and everything larger than the man size is an L, and then so on from there. Now where that really plays into consideration is when you're firing bows into melee and you need to count how many man-sized creatures there are and how many large creatures there are and where the shots are happening. Now there is also a rule that when an exceptionally larger creature, and we're talking 15 feet sort of plus, or 15 feet tall or long and so on, you don't need to roll for those because it's large enough that you can actually aim better. You've got more parts to hit. I know that in the later editions they didn't factor that in, or it became kind of different, but in first edition there is that point where a creature is large enough, and it's roughly that 15 mark, where it is able to be targeted by missile weapons even in melee. And of course psionic ability. So psionic ability, attack modes, defense modes. You can see how much thought he put into psionic ability here. Not even a thought about describing it, and then just go straight into we have a picture where possible. But in terms of psionics, the DM needs to work out how that's going to happen, because even if the players aren't psionic, and even if psionics don't factor in, there are certain creatures that are just naturally psionic, and DM needs to figure out how that is. We've covered that in one of the other abilities, one of the other previous videos, specifically about mind flayers, but it does generally go with anyone else that has psionic ability. Looking at you, demons and devils. And they also have natural abilities too that simulate psionic abilities and simulate spell abilities, and they have spells. So a fully tricked out devil or demon that has spell abilities, that has psionic abilities, and has some special abilities on their own is formidable, to say the least. So let's put what we've just gone through into some practice. Looking at our orcs, because orcs are cool, we can see that the frequency is common because they're everywhere. We can also see that they are in a 30 to 300, so their full speed and their full terms and their full warpath, they're 300 orcs, which is pretty groovy. They've got a base armor class of 6, which is made up of all sorts of different types of hodgepodge armor. They have a hit dice, movement of 9 inches, hit dice 1, 35% chance of being in lair. So if you see an orcish camp or a campsite, there's a 35% chance that they're within spitting distance. Then you've got a bunch of, the individuals have treasure type L, then they've got C, O, Q times 10, S in the lairs. And that requires a full complement of people, and then balance back based on that. So if you've got 200, it's 2/3 of whatever gets rolled out, and so on. We've done treasure types, so we can just refer back to that if you wish. What does get, you've got standard magic resistance, which is just standard. So basically as a 1 hit dice monster, they have a 1 first level fighter, and In terms of intelligence, average, low, lawful, evil, so there's a structure. Medium, they're average, average, average. What we want to focus on a little bit and have a little bit more detail on is this, where it says number of attacks 1, fine. Damage per attack 1 to 8, or by weapon type. So 1 to 8 or by weapon type. So over here we have a list of weapons. They could be sword and flail, sword and spear, and so on and so forth. And most of the time swords are long swords, they can be broadswords, on occasion short swords. But what we're looking at is, that's the weapon type. Now, the 1 to 8 raises the question, because it does come up in other scenarios as well, where this is a generic damage done by the orcs. So the orcs know how to fight, they know how to use their weapons, and they also have a lot of improvised weapons, homemade weapons, and so on. So yes, they have a weapon that might be 1 to 8 in damage, so it sort of feels like a longsword, but the blade could be anything, or a weapon could be anything. It could be a large stick with lots of spikes on it, it could be whatever. So an orcish weapon of specific orcish use that that can simulate something else, but for the most part it's a very generic term of weapon and is 1 to 8. I say it crops up because while we're in the O section, if we have a look at the Ogre Mage, they got 1 to 12, which is that. That's specifically the weapon that they've got. Now, over at the Ogre land, you'll see 1 to 10 or by weapon. Now, they don't have an actual list of what the weapons are. Essentially, what happens is that it's 1 to 10, so you face off against an Ogre, and the Ogre does, in a generic way, 1 to 10 damage. And if you actually decide, no, I'm going to give this Ogre a sword, then they apply a +2 damage. Because it's got stats. We just don't know what they always are, but we know that the Ogre has an 18 flat strength in terms of combat and in terms of what they have on offer. And then of course we've got leaders that do more and have more, but for the most part, when they say by weapon type, so if it picks up a club or if it picks up a sword, rather than just the generic Ogre 1 to 10, which may or may not be a spear, it may or may not be a sword, just a generic Ogre weapon, does 1 to 10, no other adjustments. But if you want to give it a specific weapon, there it is. Now, you might be saying, well, how does that equate to anything else? We are flipping and we are turning because we discussed this elsewhere. If I can find my E's. Elf. We love elves, alright? They're uncommon, sure. Halflings are rare, just in case you didn't know. 90% are charm and sleep spells, yep, okay, that's cool. Like charm person, that is, and sleep only, yep, okay. And we have 1 attack by weapon, or 1 to 10. So what makes up that 1 to 10? Now, you could call it that an elvish blade that's in the hands of a skilled elf, which what most of these will be, being 1+1 on their hit dice. They're actually highly skilled when it comes to... A generic elf is more skilled than a first level fighter, and so they have more ability to fight and they have a more ability to deal damage. So 1 to 10. Potentially, that's just the natural skill that makes up. Or it could be a specific elven weapon. We've all seen Lord of the Rings, and we all know that the elven hand and a half swords. Who knows? That again is up to the hands and minds of the DM. But it's worth noting that an elf does 1 to 10 damage if you just don't assign it a weapon. Over in the Sahuagin zone, because it's always worth... These guys rock. So they have 1 attack by weapon type. Okay, so he's got a trident, but by weapon type. And they have all sorts of weapons upon them. Trident, net, and dagger. So how does a net work? Well, DM, you gotta figure that out. There are actually some rules in through here. And this is again one of those instances where the monster manual makes these rules and makes these statements and makes these things, and then they don't get clarified further down. So they stand, basically. So when you're throwing a net over someone, there's a chance that they just get trapped. So that's pretty much it. Anyway, what we're saying is that special attacks, see below, when they're unarmed, so you can have 3 or 5 times, attack 3 or 5 times in a row, because they come in with all their hands and feet and bites and everything else coming in. So 5 attacks, they just drop their weapon and they just lunge at you, and you are being attacked with everything that they've got. Or you give them a weapon, in which case they go down to 1 attack. Yeah. This would assume, I would imagine, it doesn't say it, in their own environment, because they are in water, they have more access, they have the ability to be able to move easily when it comes to being underwater, and you are probably you've got more access to all use of limbs during that time. It doesn't say it specifically, but you know, that's one of those things. As a DM, you got to figure it out. So when a monster is attacking, they use their own monstrous charts. So that way we've got our 1 hit dice orc. Sure, has a to hit 0 value of 19, which is closer to a 2nd level fighter. That's a 1 hit dice orc with roughly 4 to 5 hit points on average. Then as the hit dice improve, so does their combat and attacking capabilities. These numbers aren't in the monster manual. You just need to have this book or the table, which came as a separate DM's guide, a DM screen, which had this chart as well as this chart. And that was again the precursor to having all the information in this book. So here again, if you're a 1 hit dice creature, you are along here at 1st level. You're treated as a 1st level fighter. Where this is different is when you have a creature that has hit points, or dragons generally, where they have more hit points above average. So as an example, if you're a dragon of some age, then you've got so many hit points per die that you have to play with. Then you divide the hit points by 4. So once you get over an adult level of dragon, then you're beginning to get some extra beef in there. So if you're an ancient dragon with 80 hit points, then you divide that by 4, which gives you 20, and you're treated as a 20th level for the terms of saving throws, which is 17 plus, which is pretty awesome. Same thing with most creatures, you're dividing their hit points by 4 or 4.5. Dragons, it specifically says 4, but the general consensus is 4.5 for anything that has a hit point count, and then that comes to a number. So as an example, a beholder with 75 hit points is actually considered to be a 16th or 17th level creature for terms of saving throws and combat chart. which is pretty impressive because it's 16 plus. That beholder of 75 hit points is doing a lot of, it's hitting basically, it's doing a lot of damage. And then they've got their stalks and so on. So that's where the monsters have special abilities to be able to draw upon. And intelligent monsters fight intelligently. They know when they're in front, they know when they're behind, and they know when they need to run and get away. Not all monsters fight to the death, and not all monsters fight with straight out base instincts and so on. Now that we're in the DM's guide, this is the wisdom range for creatures of certain intelligences. So anything below low is essentially a running purely on instinct and not actual learning or understanding. Some other exceptions to the saving throw charts are things like the Lish, which can be either an 18th level cleric, which means saving throws are here, or an 18th level magic user, in which case their saving throws are here. So if a creature has an actual class attached, then that's the class that you're using. But for the most part, the fighter is what is being used, as it's reasonably generic, and they've got this amazing band as they improve. The last piece of the puzzle for the monster stats are also in the DM's guide, but they are included with the monster stat blocks for Monster Manual 2 and Fiend Folio. XP. So every creature has a base XP, which is based on their generic special attacks, special abilities, hit dice, and if they do certain types of attacks. Then you've got, for every hit point, some additional as well. So as you fight some monsters, if we're looking at an ape, 130 for the base, and then plus 5 hit points, 5 XP per hit point. So the more powerful the creature, that gets added on top and it gets put into the XP pool. There is a particular rule: if a fighter fights specifically on their own with a creature, they get that experience point directly, forcing them to try and take on the bigger and nastier things on their own. There's also an optional rule for fighters getting, if they're fighting as part of, then they get an extra bonus when you divide it amongst them all anyway. But that's something we can touch upon later, or a lot of it does fall into the hands of the DM. But for the most part, if the players are working on something together, then it goes into a pool. If they're working on it individually, it goes to them. And so thieves that open locks get the XP for opening the locks. Spellcasters that cast spells get those bonuses, and if they kill the monster, they also get that, and so on. So this is where we have some really cool creatures. If we have a look at the Beholder, 12,900 as a base, plus 20 XP per hit point, because they are just kick-ass. We know the Beholders are nasty. For something that only has one attack and does 2d4 damage, they've got 10 stalks that they can do a lot of, bring a lot of pain. So having the XP charts attached to the DM's guide is a little painful, but a DM that's prepared will have at least a few items put aside so that they can keep track of who's got what, and then when the great tallies occur at the end of the session, they know who's done what. For the most part, you're looking at 10 XP per hit dice, plus 1, 2, and plus a couple of extra points for every hit point. So an orc will give off 14 hit points, 14 experience points, but their treasure might give off a lot more. And that's why the hunting for treasure is more important in some cases than the actual creatures that are defending it. For most cases, not always. While we're talking about the DMG and combat and so on, I think it's worthwhile bringing this up here because it doesn't come up often. But what you will see are negative values on here. Now basically a 1 on a D20 generally always fails. There's no hard fast rule on that, that's just how we've always played it, but that's about it. Just like because of the way that the charts are set up, natural 20s or 20s are often enough to almost always hit. But you can run where it doesn't matter. Auto hits are fine. What we don't like are automatic misses. There should be always options, and that's why we've got 5 of these 20s. So that way, even if a monster is reduced, is attacking, even a first level monster is attacking a -6 armor class, a 20 plus will be fine. So if they charge the enemy, that's a +2 on their charge. If they have any other bonuses coming in on the flank or coming in from behind, then that's an extra couple of pluses. As long as they can hit that 20, they can hit the -6 armor class. So there's that. There are always ways of adjusting to make sure that characters or monsters are never unhittable. Of course, if they have natural defenses that stop them from being attacked by non-magical weapons or non-silver, non-holy, and so on, different. But essentially, unhittable targets are not something that we like. But if we do auto hits, we're okay with that, because if someone's unconscious, that's an auto hit anyway. But anyway, what we're discussing, first of all, you'll see that the chart goes 16 plus, and I was given some specifics by TSR back in the day, which I still have, that on how to expand on that from a dinosaur point of view. So it goes up to about 30 hit dice. It's like a 29 plus, I think it goes to, or something like that. And these negative values, they are additional hit points to the damage of the attack. So if you're an attack on here and you need a -3 to hit, basically you've just got to not, when you roll for your damage, you're adding 3 to the damage result. Because as we move down the chart, which doesn't exist here, but like I said, I was given one by a TSR back in the day, and it would have expanded it all the way out. This negative became a little bit easier, and even something like when you've got a dinosaur of 36 hit dice stomping around, they do lots of damage all the time. So it's worth talking just a little bit about some demons and devils, because why not? They have a lot of abilities that they can use at will. Now all their special abilities and their special attacks and all of their powers and everything else, they still need to do them inside their own action zones. Whilst yes, it's at will, it just means that they don't have to quote unquote take up an action. So when the devil can, or one of the devils can do as a once per melee round a wall of fire, then once per melee round they can wall of fire. And that's their action, and that's their thing they're doing for that round. When they can at will darkness, they can summon the darkness, create a pitch black, and then still do all their normal actions, and then build a wall of fire or do their normal attacks and so on. So they're more like along that line of what we realize as bonus actions as opposed to free actions, but as the other colloquialism. But these are special things that still have to happen inside their own units. And of course, at will means they can do multiple things. So if they can do a darkness at will, and trying to think of something else that they can do at will, cast an illusion at will, then they can do both. They can create a blob of darkness, and they can cast an illusion because it can do these things at will. They're not actually something that it needs to take up its round to do, it just does it. And then it can continue on with its attacks and everything else. So again, the more intelligent the creature, the better they will use their abilities. And when you start to mess with demons and devils and so on, not only do you as the DM have to know what they're up to, you also have to know what you think that you have to lay out enough ideas for the players on how to defeat them. Because yes, they're demons and devils and they've all got lots of defenses of weapons and so on, but they also have some very base weaknesses that can be exploited even by low-level characters, which is good because that's what we like. It's like you have the vampire that shows up, yeah, okay, silver, holy, and magical weapons, but then if you show up with your holy weapon or with your holy item and you're throwing out the garlic and you're throwing around and splashing out the holy water, even a 0 level can splash around holy water without having to without any great skill. So there are ways of dealing with some of these great big powerful creatures. Same thing with natural animals and big dogs or cats and so on. Fire and water and elemental events. Base illusions will make them think twice and move away. So hopefully with all of that, we've covered enough about monsters, and I've answered a couple of questions. I've also hopefully created some more questions for everybody, because this is a game where there is so much to go through. And I know I've been spending the last couple of videos on D&D, and we'll get into some other games as well, but I'm getting a lot of requests about the D&D and AD&D, and I'm really specifically concentrating on parts of the game that obviously I understand, which is pre-1985-ish sort of things, and I prefer that as a style than once the book that shall not be named came in and the balance of power. I feel that this is a very balanced system and structure when balanced right with the other rules. It's very easy to make it an imbalance, but that's part of what I consider that skill of being a good DM, is in making that balance so that it handles itself nicely. I want to thank everybody. I want to thank my supporters. Like, subscribe, all the usual bits, because we love the algorithms. Everyone's talking algorithms these days. We love the algorithms and the big beautiful algorithms. And if you like what you're seeing, I'm happy to put things up on through my Patreon as well. I'm trying to kick that off, negotiate some pricing for dice or whatever, and figure it out and get a little bit more activity, so that way you get some benefit rather than just supporting me. Thank you. I want to thank everybody again. It's great, and hopefully I've answered questions, and hopefully this is what you've come here for. I appreciate all of your support, and I appreciate your time. And speaking of which, I bid you a fond adieu. All right, goodbye, and have fun. Stay safe, everybody. It's a lot of crazy out there, so let's just keep the game rolling.